The wind carried the sound of hammering across the valley at dawn, each strike echoing off the hills like gunshots in the morning mist. Claire Whitman had been awake for hours, standing at her kitchen window, watching the silhouette of her father's workshop emerge from the darkness, knowing she'd never hear those sounds again. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The funeral had been 3 days ago. The lawyer's reading of the will, 2 days. The bank's foreclosure notice, yesterday. And now, this morning, Claire found herself walking across the frost-covered field toward the workshop that had defined her childhood, carrying the weight of a decision that would either save everything her family had built or destroy it completely. The Whitman farm sat in a hollow between rolling hills in the Shenandoah Valley, 200 acres of Virginia soil that had grown tobacco, corn, and dreams for 4 generations. The farmhouse was weathered cedar and stone, built by her great-grandfather in 1924, with additions added as each generation tried to make their mark on the land. The barn leaned slightly to the east, a victim of too many storms and too little money for proper repairs. The equipment shed housed tractors that ran more on prayer than diesel fuel. But the workshop was different. The workshop was where Samuel Whitman had spent 30 years of his life building something the world had forgotten how to appreciate. Claire pushed open the heavy wooden doors, and the smell hit her immediately: coal dust, machine oil, and the lingering scent of her father's pipe tobacco. Shafts of morning light cut through the dusty air, illuminating the massive shape that dominated the center of the building. The steam engine sat on blocks of oak, its brass fittings dulled with age but still magnificent. 15 tons of iron, steel, and Victorian craftsmanship that her father had rescued from a demolished textile mill in North Carolina 20 years ago. He'd spent every spare moment since then restoring it, machining parts in his home shop when originals couldn't be found, studying engineering manuals from the 1880s, teaching himself metallurgy and precision welding. She's a beauty, isn't she? Claire spun around to find Jake Morrison standing in the doorway, his work boots silent on the concrete floor. Jake had been her father's only real friend in recent years, another man obsessed with machines that the modern world had discarded. He owned the scrapyard on the other side of town, but his real passion was steam engines. He and Samuel had spent countless evenings in this workshop, arguing about valve timing and boiler pressure while sharing bottles of bourbon. "Jake." Claire's voice was strained. "I didn't hear you come in. Your father gave me a key years ago. Hope you don't mind." Jake approached the engine slowly, running his weathered hand along the cylinder. "I came to pay my respects to the old girl before I have to sell her." Claire finished the sentence he couldn't. "Along with everything else." The numbers were simple and brutal. Samuel Whitman had spent the last 5 years of his life pouring every dollar into the farm and the engine restoration, taking out loans against the property to pay for materials and equipment. When the cancer took him, he'd left behind a steam engine worth maybe $50,000 to a collector, and debts totaling nearly $300,000. Claire was a diesel mechanic by trade, working at Morrison Heavy Equipment, Jake's legitimate business, but her expertise was modern machinery. Computerized engines, hydraulic systems, electronic diagnostics. She could rebuild a Caterpillar engine blindfolded, but the steam engine in front of her might as well have been built by aliens. "Your father never told you about the message, did he?" Jake asked quietly. Claire looked up from the papers she'd been holding. "What message?" Jake pulled a folded letter from his jacket pocket. "Samuel gave this to me 2 weeks before he died. Made me promise to give it to you after the funeral, but only if you decided to keep working on the engine." Claire took the letter with trembling hands. Her father's handwriting was shaky, the cancer had affected his motor skills in the final months, but still recognizable. "Claire, if you're reading this, it means Jake kept his promise and you've decided to continue what I started. The engine isn't just a restoration project. It's a puzzle I've been trying to solve for 20 years. Hidden inside her mechanisms is something that could change everything for our family, but I ran out of time to find it myself." The builder left clues. "Look for the anomalies, parts that don't belong, modifications that serve no apparent purpose, spaces that seem too large or too small for their function. Trust your mechanical instincts, but also trust your heart. This old girl has been waiting a long time to tell her story. I'm sorry I couldn't finish this myself. I'm sorry about the debts and the farm and all the weight I'm putting on your shoulders. But I believe in you, Claire. You have better hands and a sharper mind than I ever did. If anyone can solve this puzzle, it's you. Love always, Dad. P.S. Start with the smoke box. Something's not right about the internal dimensions. Claire read the letter twice, then looked up at Jake. Did you know about this? I knew your father believed there was something special about this engine, something beyond just the restoration. He'd been researching its history for years, trying to track down who built it, where it came from originally. But he never told me specifics. Claire walked around the engine slowly, seeing it with new eyes. The locomotive was a 460 configuration, built sometime in the 1880s according to the brass nameplate that read Virginia Mountain Railway No. 23. But her father had always suspected the nameplate was added later, that the engine's true origins were more mysterious. She climbed up onto the footplate and peered into the firebox. Everything looked normal: firebrick lining, grates for holding coal, the expected configuration for a steam locomotive of this era. But when she moved to the smoke box at the front of the engine, she noticed what her father's letter had mentioned. The smoke box seemed larger than it should be for an engine this size. She'd helped her father work on enough steam equipment to have a sense of proportions, and something was definitely off. Jake, do you have a good flashlight? He handed her a powerful LED work light, and Claire climbed down to examine the smoke box from the outside. The external dimensions didn't match what she'd seen inside. There had to be 6 inches of space unaccounted for. There's a hidden compartment, she said, more to herself than to Jake. How can you tell? The math doesn't work. The internal space is too small for the external dimensions. Claire began examining every rivet, every seam, looking for signs of modification or concealment. Then she found it. A series of rivets along one section that were slightly different from the others, newer, made of slightly different metal. When she pressed on the plate they secured, it gave slightly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jake, I need your smallest pry bar. Working carefully, Claire managed to work the modified plate loose without damaging it. Behind it was a cavity the size of a shoebox, lined with oiled canvas to protect its contents from moisture. Inside was a metal cylinder, sealed at both ends, and a leather-bound journal wrapped in more oiled canvas. Claire's hands shook as she opened the journal. The first page was filled with precise engineering drawings and calculations, but the handwriting was different from any she recognized. At the top of the page, in elegant script, were the words, "The Private Engineering Notes of Thaddeus Brennan, Master Steam Engineer, Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, 1883 to 1889." Brennan, Claire whispered. I've heard that name before. Jake leaned over her shoulder. Thaddeus Brennan was famous. One of the best steam engineers of his era. But he disappeared in 1889, right around the time the railroad companies started transitioning to newer technologies. Some said he was working on revolutionary improvements to steam engine design, but nothing was ever found. Claire turned the pages carefully. The journal contained detailed technical drawings, mathematical calculations, and written observations about steam engine efficiency and power output. But scattered throughout were notes that seemed to have nothing to do with engineering. The consortium grows impatient. They want the designs now, before the testing is complete. Henderson came by again today. His offers are becoming threats. I've decided to hide the most important work until I can find someone trustworthy. The implications are too significant to let fall into the wrong hands. If something happens to me, I pray someone with the skills and integrity to understand what I've discovered will find these notes. Claire looked up at Jake. What kind of discoveries could a steam engineer make that would need to be hidden? In 1889? Could be anything. New metallurgy techniques, more efficient fuel combustion, improved valve systems. Or. Jake paused, thinking. There were rumors in those days about engineers working on ways to make steam competitive with the new electric and gasoline technologies. If Brennan had figured out how to dramatically improve steam engine efficiency, it could have changed transportation history. Claire continued reading. The technical notes became increasingly complex, filled with calculations she'd need time to study properly. But near the end of the journal, she found something that made her breath catch. The prototype is complete. Efficiency improvements of 340% over standard designs. Fuel consumption reduced by half. Power output increased by 60%. The railway companies would pay any price for this technology. But Henderson's consortium doesn't want to license the improvements. They want to buy the patents outright and suppress the technology. They've made it clear that steam must die to make way for their investments in oil and electricity. I've refused their final offer. Tomorrow I'll take the prototype plans to the patent office in Washington. If I don't return, the backup documentation is hidden where only an engineer would think to look. The final entry was dated September 15, 1889. They came for me tonight. Henderson and 2 others. I managed to escape, but they'll be watching the roads. I've hidden the prototype plans and my master calculations in the most secure place I can think of, inside the very technology they're trying to destroy. Someday, someone will find them. Someday, the world will be ready for what steam engines could truly become. Claire set the journal down with shaking hands. Jake, if this is real. If it's real, your father left you more than just a restoration project. He left you one of the most significant engineering discoveries of the 19th century. Claire opened the metal cylinder carefully. Inside was a rolled set of blueprints, incredibly detailed technical drawings showing modifications to steam engine design that were far advanced from anything built in the 1880s. The plans included innovations that wouldn't be rediscovered until decades later: superheating systems, compound expansion cylinders, advanced valve gear. But at the bottom of the plans was something even more significant. A complete prototype design for what Brennan called a high-efficiency steam power plant, essentially a steam engine so advanced it could compete with early internal combustion engines in terms of power and fuel efficiency. This could revolutionize steam technology even today, Claire said softly. With modern materials and manufacturing techniques, these designs could produce steam engines that would be cleaner and more efficient than diesel. Jake nodded slowly. Your father must have been working on this for years, trying to understand Brennan's innovations. That's why he spent so much money on the restoration. He wasn't just rebuilding an old engine. He was trying to prove that Brennan's designs actually worked. Claire looked around the workshop with new understanding. The specialized machine tools, the metallurgy equipment, the precision measuring instruments, her father hadn't just been indulging a hobby. He'd been conducting serious engineering research. But why didn't he tell me, she asked. Why keep this secret? Maybe he wanted to be sure before he got your hopes up. Or maybe. Jake's expression darkened. Maybe he learned something about why Thaddeus Brennan disappeared, and he was worried about the same thing happening to his family. Claire felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air flowing through the workshop doors. She thought about the consortium mentioned in Brennan's notes, about powerful interests that wanted steam technology suppressed to protect their investments in oil and electricity. Jake, if I continue this work, if I try to prove that Brennan's designs work, you'll be threatening some very powerful industries. Oil companies, electric utilities, maybe even government interests. These aren't the kind of people who just go away when you ask nicely. Claire looked at the steam engine sitting silently in the morning light. 3 days ago, it had been just her father's eccentric restoration project, a beautiful but obsolete machine from a bygone era. Now it represented something much more significant, the possibility of changing the future of energy and transportation, but also the danger that came with possessing knowledge that powerful people wanted suppressed. The sound of a car door slamming outside broke the silence. Claire and Jake moved to the workshop window and saw a black SUV parked in the driveway. 2 men in expensive suits were walking toward the house, but when they noticed the open workshop doors, they changed direction. Miss Whitman? the older man called out as he approached. "My name is Robert Henderson. I represent certain business interests that were acquainted with your father's work. I was hoping we could have a conversation about the steam engine." Claire felt her blood turn to ice. Henderson. The same name from Brennan's journal, from 1889. Either an incredible coincidence, or a family that had been pursuing this technology for over a century. She looked at Jake, saw the same realization in his eyes, then turned back toward the approaching men. Whatever her father had stumbled into, whatever secret Thaddeus Brennan had died to protect, it wasn't over. It was just beginning. Claire stepped forward, positioning herself between the approaching strangers and the steam engine. "Mr. Henderson. That's an interesting coincidence, your family name appearing in documentation from 1889. Robert Henderson's smile was practiced, corporate, the kind that never reached the eyes. He was perhaps 60, with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted through a combination of money and subtle intimidation. His companion was younger, broader, with the alert posture of private security. No coincidence at all, Miss Whitman. My great-great-grandfather was quite interested in steam technology during the late 19th century. Our family has maintained that interest across generations." Henderson's gaze moved past Claire to the locomotive. "I understand your father was working on some historical restoration projects. Perhaps we could discuss purchasing his collection." Jake moved to stand beside Claire, his expression guarded. "Collection's not for sale. Samuel spent 20 years on that engine." "I'm sure he did." Henderson's tone remained pleasant, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Unfortunately, Miss Whitman, I'm also aware of your father's financial situation. The farm is in foreclosure. The equipment loans are in default. Sometimes difficult circumstances require pragmatic solutions." Claire felt anger building in her chest, hot and dangerous. "You seem remarkably well informed about my family's private business, Mr. Henderson. Information is simply another form of currency, Miss Whitman. And in my experience, most problems can be solved with the appropriate application of resources." Henderson reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded document. "I'm prepared to offer you $200,000 for the locomotive and any associated documentation or materials your father may have collected." The number hit Claire like a physical blow. $200,000 would cover the immediate debts, save the farm, give her breathing room to figure out the rest of her life. It was more money than she'd see in 5 years of work at the equipment yard. It was also far too much for a partially restored steam engine from a man who claimed casual interest in historical artifacts. "That's a generous offer," Claire said carefully, "but I'm not ready to sell my father's work." Henderson's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Miss Whitman, I hope you'll reconsider. Your father was a talented mechanic, but he was also a man who sometimes pursued projects beyond his understanding. Steam technology from the 1880s can be complicated. There are historical sensitivities, intellectual property concerns that date back generations. Are you threatening me, Mr. Henderson? I'm suggesting that some restoration projects are better left to experts with the appropriate resources and legal clearances." Henderson glanced around the workshop, his gaze lingering on the machine tools and technical equipment. "Your father invested heavily in this facility. It would be unfortunate if his work were to become entangled in complex legal proceedings that could delay resolution for years." Jake stepped forward, his mechanic's hands clenched into fists. "I think you've said enough. Time for you to leave." Henderson's companion tensed slightly, but the older man held up a restraining hand. "Of course. Miss Whitman, please consider my offer carefully. I'll be in the area for several days if you'd like to discuss terms." He handed her a business card. "I hope we can reach a mutually beneficial arrangement." After they left, Claire and Jake stood in the workshop doorway, watching the black SUV disappear down the gravel road. "That was no collector," Jake said quietly. "That was someone with serious money and serious connections, making sure you understand the score." Claire looked down at the business card. "Henderson Industrial Holdings, with addresses in Washington, D.C., Houston, and Denver." The kind of corporate entity that could own pieces of everything from oil refineries to power plants. Jake, what if my father was right? What if Thaddeus Brennan really did discover something revolutionary, and what if my father figured out how to make it work? Then you're holding technology that could threaten billions of dollars in existing energy infrastructure. And people who control that kind of money don't negotiate. They eliminate problems. That evening, Claire sat at her kitchen table with Brennan's journal and technical drawings spread before her. She'd been studying the engineering calculations for hours, and the more she understood, the more remarkable Brennan's innovations became. The steam engine sitting in her workshop wasn't just a restored antique. According to Brennan's notes, her father had been methodically implementing the hidden improvements, turning the locomotive into a proof of concept for technology that could revolutionize modern power generation. Brennan had discovered a way to superheat steam far beyond conventional levels while maintaining safe pressure. His valve gear designs allowed for variable expansion that extracted far more energy from each pound of fuel. Most remarkably, his combustion modifications could burn almost any organic material with near-complete efficiency. Claire's mechanical training let her understand the implications. A modern steam plant built on Brennan's principles could generate electricity more cleanly and efficiently than natural gas turbines. Steam vehicles using these innovations could compete with electric cars in terms of performance while using renewable biomass for fuel. It was technology that could make oil obsolete. Her phone rang, startling her from her calculations. The number was local but unfamiliar. "Miss Whitman? This is Sheriff David Torres. I'm calling about your father's property. We've had reports of suspicious activity in your area. Thought you might want to know." Claire's pulse quickened. "What kind of activity?" "Vehicles that don't belong, people asking questions about your family's business around town. Could be nothing, but given your father's recent passing, I wanted you to be aware. You might consider staying somewhere else for a few nights." "Sheriff, are you telling me I'm in danger?" There was a pause. "I'm telling you to be careful, Miss Whitman. Your father was well respected in this community, but he was also involved in some unusual projects that may have attracted the wrong kind of attention. If you're continuing his work, you should know that not everyone wants to see it succeed." After hanging up, Claire realized that even local law enforcement understood the stakes better than she'd initially grasped. Her father hadn't just been an eccentric mechanic pursuing an expensive hobby. He'd been conducting research that powerful interests wanted suppressed. She thought about Henderson's offer. $200,000 would solve her immediate problems and let her walk away from a situation that was clearly more dangerous than she'd realized. She could sell the farm, move somewhere else, start over with enough money to build a new life. But she also thought about her father's letter, about Thaddeus Brennan dying to protect his discoveries, about the possibility that clean, efficient steam technology could help solve energy problems that threaten the entire planet. The next morning brought a steady November rain that drummed against the workshop roof as Claire worked. She'd decided to continue her father's research, at least long enough to understand what he'd discovered. If the technology was real, she owed it to his memory to document it properly before making any decisions. She was deep inside the engine's firebox, examining the modified combustion chamber, when she heard footsteps behind her. "Claire? You in there?" She recognized the voice, Tommy Brennan, her father's cousin and the only other family member who'd shown interest in the steam engine project. Tommy was a retired power plant engineer who'd helped her father with some of the more complex technical challenges. "Tommy! I didn't hear you come in." Claire crawled out of the firebox, wiping coal dust from her hands. "I was hoping you'd come by. I found something incredible in the engine." Tommy's expression was troubled. "Claire, we need to talk. About your father's work, about what he was really trying to do here." She showed him Brennan's journal and technical drawings, watching his face grow increasingly grave as he studied the calculations. "Dear God," Tommy whispered. "Sam actually found them. Thaddeus Brennan's original designs." "Tommy, did you know? Did my father tell you what he was looking for?" Tommy sat heavily on a workbench, suddenly looking older than his 68 years. Your father came to me about 5 years ago with questions about steam efficiency that didn't make sense for a simple restoration. He'd been researching the engine's history and found references to modifications that shouldn't have existed in 1889. You helped him? I helped him understand the thermodynamics, the metallurgy requirements for the temperatures and pressures he was calculating. I thought he was just satisfying curiosity about historical engineering. I never imagined. Tommy gestured at the technical drawings. Claire, these designs are revolutionary even by today's standards. If someone built a power plant using these principles, it could generate electricity at a fraction of current costs while burning renewable biomass. Then why do you look so worried? Tommy was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the rain. Because 3 months ago, your father asked me to help him file patent applications for the improvements he'd developed. He was convinced he'd solved the practical problems that prevented Brennan's designs from working in the 1880s. Claire felt cold despite the warmth from the locomotive's banked fire. What happened to the patent applications? They were rejected on technical grounds that didn't make sense. When Sam tried to appeal through different channels, he started getting warnings. Phone calls telling him to drop the project. Visits from men who claimed to represent government agencies but never showed proper identification. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I hoped selling the engine would end it. I hoped whoever was pressuring Sam would lose interest if the technology disappeared into private hands. Tommy looked directly at her. But after seeing these original documents, I realized Sam was closer to a breakthrough than I understood. And that makes you far more dangerous to certain interests than I'd feared. The workshop door opened, and Jake entered, shaking rain from his coat. His expression was grim. Claire, we have a problem. I just came from town. Word's getting around that you found something valuable in that engine. People are talking about offers being made, about outside interests circling the property. What kind of talk? The kind that says you're sitting on something worth killing for. Jake's voice was flat, matter of fact. And the kind that says some folks think you're in over your head and should take whatever deal's been offered while you still can. Tommy stood up slowly. Jake's right. Claire, there are forces at work here that go far beyond local politics or business competition. The energy industry is worth trillions of dollars globally. Technology that threatens that kind of investment doesn't just get suppressed, it gets eliminated, along with anyone who tries to develop it. Claire looked around the workshop that had been her father's sanctuary, at the steam engine that represented decades of his passion and dedication. She thought about Henderson's offer, about the sheriff's warning, about the weight of knowledge that men had died to protect. So what are my choices? Sell out and pretend none of this exists? Or keep working and risk ending up like Thaddeus Brennan? There's a third option, Tommy said quietly. Go public. Document everything, publish the technical specifications, make the technology available to everyone simultaneously. Once it's in the open, there's no point in suppressing it. Jake shook his head. That's assuming she lives long enough to go public. From what I've seen of Henderson and his people, they're not interested in negotiation. Then what do you suggest? I suggest Claire gets out of town tonight, with copies of everything important, and figures out her next move from somewhere safe. Claire walked to the locomotive and placed her hand on the warm metal. Her father had spent the last years of his life trying to unlock the secrets hidden inside this machine. He died believing he was on the verge of a breakthrough that could change the world. I'm not running, she said quietly. Not from Henderson, not from whoever was threatening my father, not from the possibility that this technology could actually make a difference. Claire, no, Jake. My father didn't run. Thaddeus Brennan didn't run until it was too late. Someone has to be willing to stand up to these people, and it might as well be me. Tommy studied her face. If you're determined to continue this work, then we need to be smart about it. Document everything thoroughly, create multiple backup copies, establish legal protections. And we need allies, Jake added. People with resources and connections who can help when Henderson and his friends escalate beyond threats. Claire nodded, feeling the weight of decision settle around her like the November rain outside. She was committed now, to finishing her father's work and exposing the truth about technology that powerful interests had kept hidden for over a century. But as she looked at the two men who'd offered to help her, she wondered if any of them truly understood what they were up against, or whether their determination would be enough when the real pressure began. Outside, the rain continued to fall on ground that had seen generations of struggle, triumph, and loss. The land would endure whatever came next, as it always had. The question was whether the people who loved it would be strong enough to do the same. 3 weeks later, Claire stood in the pre-dawn darkness of her workshop, watching steam rise from the locomotive stack for the first time in over 30 years. The sound was unlike anything she'd ever experienced, not the sharp bark of a diesel engine or the whine of electric motors, but something deeper, more primal. The breath of iron lungs that remembered when the world ran on fire and water. Tommy adjusted the pressure gauge with the careful precision of a man who'd spent 40 years working with steam. She's holding steady at 200 psi. Your father's modifications to the superheater are working exactly as Brennan designed them. Jake monitored the fuel consumption meter they'd installed to test efficiency. Burn rate is 40% lower than theoretical for a standard engine this size. If these numbers hold under load testing, we'll have proven that Thaddeus Brennan solved the efficiency problem that killed steam power. Claire's voice carried a mixture of triumph and exhaustion. The past 3 weeks had been a blur of 18-hour days, implementing the final modifications needed to test Brennan's innovations properly. They'd worked in secret, telling no one outside their small circle about the engine's progress. Henderson's men had been watching the farm, but they'd grown complacent as days passed without apparent activity. Claire had been careful to maintain the appearance of normal life, working her regular shifts at the equipment yard, making routine trips to town, giving no outward sign that anything significant was happening in the workshop. But inside the converted barn, they'd been conducting what amounted to industrial archaeology, bringing 19th-century genius back to life with 21st-century precision. Every component of Brennan's design had been painstakingly restored or recreated, using modern metallurgy to achieve tolerances the original builder could only dream of. Time for the real test, Claire said, moving to the throttle. Let's see what she can do under load. They'd connected the locomotive to a dynamometer borrowed from Tommy's former power plant, a device that could measure the engine's actual power output while providing resistance to simulate real work. As Claire opened the throttle gradually, the steam engine's note deepened, settling into a rhythm that seemed to match the heartbeat of the earth itself. The numbers on the dynamometer display climbed steadily. 1,000 horsepower. 1,500. 2,000. The engine was producing nearly twice the power output of a conventional steam locomotive its size, while burning significantly less fuel. My God, Tommy whispered, watching the efficiency calculations scroll across his laptop screen. Thermal efficiency of 38%. That's better than most modern diesel engines. Jake's expression was grim despite the technical triumph. Which means we've just proven that technology exists to revolutionize transportation and power generation using renewable biomass instead of fossil fuels. And that makes us extremely dangerous to very powerful people, Claire finished. As if summoned by her words, the workshop lights suddenly blazed to life. Through the windows, they could see vehicles surrounding the building, the black SUV they recognized, plus 2 others. Henderson's voice came through a bullhorn. Miss Whitman, we need to discuss the situation. Please shut down your equipment and come outside. Claire looked at Tommy and Jake. They'd anticipated this moment, planned for it, but the reality of armed confrontation felt different from theoretical preparation. Keep her running, she told Jake, moving toward the workshop's rear exit. No matter what happens, don't let them stop the test. The world needs to see these numbers. She stepped out through the back door and circled around to face Henderson and his team. There were 6 men now, all wearing the kind of tactical gear that suggested military or private security backgrounds. Mr. Henderson. Bit early for a social call, isn't it? Henderson's corporate politeness had evaporated, replaced by something harder and more direct. Miss Whitman, you've been conducting unauthorized testing of proprietary technology. That engine contains innovations that are subject to existing patent protections and national security considerations. Proprietary technology from 1889? Patents that expired before my grandfather was born? The specific implementations you're using were developed by private research conducted under federal contracts. The intellectual property belongs to Henderson Industrial Holdings and our partner organizations. Claire felt cold understanding wash over her. You've been suppressing Brennan's technology for over a century. Your family, your companies, your government connections, all working to make sure efficient steam power never threatened oil and electric utilities. Miss Whitman, some technologies are too disruptive to be released without careful consideration of economic and social impacts. The energy infrastructure of this country represents trillions of dollars in investment and millions of jobs. Introducing destabilizing innovations without proper planning could cause economic collapse. Or it could provide clean, efficient energy that doesn't depend on fossil fuels or centralized power grids. Henderson's expression hardened. Which is exactly why such technology must be carefully controlled. Miss Whitman, I'm prepared to offer you $500,000 for all materials related to this project, plus a consulting contract that would make you very comfortable for the rest of your life. And if I refuse? Then we'll be forced to pursue legal remedies to protect our intellectual property interests. Your workshop will be sealed pending litigation. Your equipment will be impounded as evidence. The farm will be foreclosed while you spend years in court fighting charges you can't afford to defend. Claire looked back toward the workshop, where steam continued to rise from the locomotive stack. Inside that building was proof that clean, efficient energy technology had been available for over a century, suppressed by interests that profited from scarcity and environmental destruction. Mr. Henderson, I think you should know something about the past 3 weeks. What's that, Miss Whitman? We haven't just been testing the engine. We've been documenting everything. Video of the modifications, real-time data on performance and efficiency, complete technical specifications based on Brennan's original designs. Henderson's confident expression flickered. Documentation that was obtained through theft and trespass, making it inadmissible in any legitimate forum. Documentation that's already been uploaded to multiple servers and distributed to engineering schools, environmental organizations, and independent researchers around the world. Now Henderson's composure cracked completely. You couldn't have. We've been monitoring all communications from this location. Local communications, maybe. But not the satellite uplink Jake installed 3 days ago, or the automated uploads that have been transmitting data every hour since we started the test runs. Claire pulled out her phone and showed Henderson a simple app interface. One button, Mr. Henderson. If I press it, or if I fail to check in every 12 hours, complete documentation of Brennan's steam technology gets released simultaneously to 200 different recipients worldwide. Patent applications, technical specifications, video demonstrations, historical documentation of the suppression conspiracy, everything becomes public domain. For the first time since she'd met him, Robert Henderson looked genuinely afraid. Miss Whitman, you don't understand the forces you're challenging. This isn't just about my company or my family. There are government agencies, international corporations, foreign interests that will not allow this technology to destabilize global energy markets. Then they'll have to deal with a world where the technology already exists and can't be suppressed anymore. They'll come after you personally. Make your life impossible. Frame you for crimes you didn't commit. Destroy everyone you care about. Claire thought about her father, who'd died trying to unlock secrets that could change the world. She thought about Thaddeus Brennan, murdered for discovering innovations that threatened powerful interests. She thought about all the environmental damage and economic exploitation that could have been prevented if clean, efficient steam technology hadn't been buried for a century. Mr. Henderson, they already destroyed my father's life. They've been destroying the environment and exploiting energy scarcity for generations. At some point, someone has to be willing to say enough. She looked directly at him. I'm saying enough. Henderson stood silently for several long moments, the sound of the running steam engine audible even outside the workshop. Finally, he nodded to his men, and they began moving back toward their vehicles. "This isn't over, Miss Whitman. You've made enemies you can't imagine." "Maybe. But I've also made sure that Brennan's technology can't be buried again." After Henderson's convoy disappeared down the gravel road, Claire returned to the workshop where Tommy and Jake were still monitoring the engine's performance. "How long do we have before they come back with federal warrants or worse?" Jake asked. "Long enough to finish documenting everything and make sure the information reaches people who can do something with it." Claire looked at the locomotive, still running smoothly and efficiently on Brennan's revolutionary innovations. "But probably not long enough to stay here safely." Tommy nodded grimly. "I've got contacts at 3 different universities who would be interested in continuing this research under academic protection. And there are environmental organizations with enough resources to fund proper development of the technology." "What about the farm?" Claire walked to the workshop window and looked out at the land her family had worked for 4 generations. The fields where her great-grandfather had grown tobacco, where her father had taught her to understand the relationship between soil and machinery, between tradition and innovation. The farm will survive. Land always does. But maybe it's time for new hands to work it, people who can afford to treat it right without gambling everything on projects that powerful interests want suppressed. 6 months later, Claire stood in a university laboratory in Colorado, watching a team of engineering students test a small-scale power plant built on Brennan's principles. The prototype was generating electricity at efficiency levels that made conventional power sources look primitive, burning biomass so cleanly that the exhaust was mostly water vapor. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Jake. "Henderson Industrial Holdings filed for bankruptcy last week. Turns out their oil and gas investments were more leveraged than anyone realized. Amazing what happens when disruptive technology goes public." Claire smiled, thinking about her father's letter, about his belief that some discoveries were too important to keep hidden. The technology that had cost Thaddeus Brennan his life and had consumed her father's final years was now being developed openly, funded by grants and venture capital from investors who understood that clean energy represented opportunity rather than threat. The farm had sold to a young family who'd converted it to sustainable agriculture, using some of the proceeds from the technology licensing to implement environmental restoration projects. Henderson's threats had proved largely empty once the information became public. It was difficult to suppress technology that hundreds of researchers were already working to improve and implement. Claire kept the original locomotive, though. It sat now in a place of honor at the university's engineering school, still capable of running but serving primarily as a reminder of how innovation and courage could overcome even century-long conspiracies of suppression. Sometimes, late at night in the laboratory, she could hear the echo of steam engines in the distance, not the actual machines, but the sound of possibility itself, the breath of technologies that could power a cleaner future if people were brave enough to pursue them. Her father had been right about more than just Brennan's innovations. Some things were worth risking everything to protect and preserve. Some truths were too important to leave buried, no matter how powerful the interests that wanted them suppressed. And sometimes, if you were willing to stand up to those interests, you discovered that they weren't as powerful as they wanted everyone to believe. Sometimes, the courage to speak truth was the only tool you needed to change the world. The steam still rose, carrying with it the promise of what determination and integrity could accomplish when they refused to be intimidated. In the end, that promise had proved stronger than all the money and threats that had tried to contain it. 5 years had passed since the morning Claire first heard steam rise from her father's locomotive, and the world had quietly changed around the small farm in the Shenandoah Valley. The transformation hadn't come with fanfare or headlines, but with the steady persistence of good ideas taking root in fertile ground. Claire returned to the farm on a crisp October morning, driving a hybrid truck that ran on both electricity and a small steam generator based on Brennan's principles. The technology had evolved far beyond what even Thaddeus Brennan had envisioned, refined by teams of engineers who'd built upon his foundational discoveries. Clean steam power was no longer a curiosity or a threat, it had become simply another tool in humanity's expanding toolkit for sustainable energy. The farmhouse looked better than it had in decades. The new owners, David and Maria Santos, had restored the cedar siding and rebuilt the front porch with reclaimed timber from the old tobacco barn. Their children's bicycles leaned against the steps, and a vegetable garden flourished where Claire's father had once parked broken equipment waiting for parts. Maria came out to greet her, wiping flour from her hands on a kitchen towel. "Claire, we weren't expecting you until this afternoon. I wanted to see the workshop before the ceremony," Claire explained, embracing the woman who'd become both caretaker and friend to the land her family had loved for generations. "Is that all right?" "Of course. Jake's been there since sunrise, making sure everything's perfect for the dedication." Claire walked the familiar path across the field, past the spot where her father had taught her to diagnose engine problems by sound alone, past the old oak tree where 4 generations of Whitmans had carved their initials into bark that had grown thick and weathered around the letters. The workshop had been transformed into something her father would barely recognize, yet something he would have understood completely. The building itself remained the same weathered wood and corrugated metal, but inside, it now housed the Whitman Center for Sustainable Engineering. University students worked alongside local high school kids, learning to build and maintain steam-powered generators that could provide clean electricity to rural communities around the world. Jake looked up from a workbench where he was helping a teenage girl calibrate a pressure gauge. His hair had gone completely gray in the past 5 years, but his hands remained steady and sure. "Afternoon, boss," he said, using the nickname that had stuck from their days working together at the equipment yard. "Ready for your big moment?" Claire surveyed the workshop that had become a classroom, or research facility, and a monument to her father's persistence. The original locomotive sat in the center of the space, fully restored and occasionally fired up for demonstrations, but it was no longer the solitary focus of the room. Smaller steam engines, designed for practical applications, occupied workbenches around the perimeter. Solar panels on the roof powered modern computers that ran simulations of steam system designs. The past and future coexisted in easy harmony. "I keep thinking Dad would be amazed by all this," Claire said quietly. "He spent so many years working alone, convinced nobody would understand what he was trying to accomplish." "He wasn't wrong about that," Jake replied. "Most people didn't understand. But the few who did, they were the ones who mattered." Tommy Brennan appeared from behind the locomotive, moving more slowly than he had 5 years ago but still sharp-eyed and engaged. He'd become the center's chief technical advisor, translating complex engineering principles for students who would carry the knowledge into a future he'd helped make possible. "Claire, good to see you. I've been reviewing the latest efficiency reports from the pilot projects. The community power systems we've installed are running at 97% uptime, and fuel consumption is even lower than our models predicted." Claire nodded, but her attention was drawn to a new addition since her last visit, a display case containing items from the original discovery. Brennan's journal, carefully preserved behind climate-controlled glass. Photographs of the hidden compartment where the plans had waited for over a century. Her father's letter, the one that had started her down the path that led to this moment. But what moved her most was a new photograph she hadn't seen before, her father and Thaddeus Brennan, standing side by side in a composite image that Jake had created digitally. 2 men separated by a century, united by their belief that technology should serve humanity rather than control it. "Jake, when did you make this?" "Last week." Seemed like they should be together for the dedication ceremony. Both of them paid a price for believing in this technology. Both of them deserves to see what came of their sacrifice. The afternoon brought visitors from around the country. Engineers and environmentalists, students and retirees, people whose lives had been changed by the clean energy systems that had grown from Brennan's original designs. But the group that mattered most to Claire was smaller, the families who'd lived in the shadow of the farm's secrets and struggles. Patricia Greer, now in her 80s, had driven from North Carolina to see technology that might have saved her brother if it had been developed openly instead of suppressed. Carlos Ortiz brought his grandson Danny, who now ran his own sustainable energy consulting firm. Martha Sinclair came with a stack of newspaper clippings documenting the clean energy revolution that had quietly transformed rural America over the past 5 years. As evening approached, they gathered in the workshop for the formal dedication ceremony. Claire had been asked to speak, to explain what the center meant and why it mattered. But standing before the group of people who'd supported her family through decades of struggle and triumph, she found herself thinking less about technology than about the deeper truths that guided their work. "My father used to say that engineering wasn't just about fixing broken things," Claire began, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet space. "It was about understanding how things work, why they fail, and having the patience to bring them back to life." She gestured toward the locomotive, gleaming under the workshop lights. "But I've learned that he was talking about more than just machines. He was talking about communities, about relationships, about the connections between past and future that make us who we are." Claire looked around the room at faces that had weathered years of uncertainty and loss, people who'd chosen courage over comfort when the moment demanded it. Thaddeus Brennan died protecting knowledge that he believed could make the world better. My father spent the last years of his life trying to prove that Brennan was right. And all of you, every one of you, took risks to make sure that knowledge didn't die with them. She paused, thinking about Henderson and the interests he'd represented, the powerful forces that had tried to keep beneficial technology buried for over a century. "We learned that the real power isn't in controlling information or suppressing innovation. The real power is in sharing knowledge, in building communities that support each other through difficult transitions, in believing that ordinary people can solve extraordinary problems if they're given the tools and the freedom to try." The dedication plaque was simple bronze mounted on local stone, reading, "The Whitman Center for Sustainable Engineering. Dedicated to the memory of Samuel Whitman and Thaddeus Brennan, who believed that technology should serve all humanity, not just those with the power to control it." As the ceremony concluded and visitors began to drift away, Claire found herself alone in the workshop with the locomotive that had started everything. She climbed up onto the footplate and sat in the engineer's seat, hands resting on controls her father had rebuilt with painstaking attention to detail. The setting sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across workbenches where tomorrow's engineers would continue the work of building a more sustainable world. The building was quiet now, but it held the promise of tomorrow's activity, the sound of young voices learning to solve problems their grandparents had thought impossible. Claire thought about the choices that had led to this moment. The decision to open Brennan's hidden compartment instead of walking away. The determination to continue her father's work despite threats and intimidation. The willingness to share discoveries that could have made her wealthy if she'd kept them secret. Each choice had seemed impossibly difficult at the time, but looking back, she realized they'd been inevitable. Her father had raised her to understand that some things mattered more than personal safety or financial security. The land had taught her that growth required both deep roots and the courage to reach toward light. A soft knock at the workshop door interrupted her reflections. Maria Santos entered carrying a thermos of coffee and 2 cups. "Thought you might like some company," Maria said, settling onto a nearby workbench. "The kids are asleep, and David's checking on the evening chores." "Thank you. For the coffee, and for everything else. You've made this place feel alive again." Maria poured coffee for both of them, the familiar ritual marking the end of a long day. "You know, when we first moved here, I was worried about living with so much history. The farm had been through so much struggle, so much loss. I wondered if the land would ever feel peaceful. And now? Now I think the struggle was necessary. Not the suffering itself, but the willingness to keep fighting for something better. The land remembers all of it, the failures and the triumphs, the secrets and the revelations. But it also remembers the people who refused to give up." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled over the valley. Through the windows, they could see lights beginning to twinkle in houses throughout the region, many of them powered by clean steam systems that traced their lineage back to designs hidden in this very locomotive. "Maria, do you think my father would be proud of what this became?" Maria considered the question seriously. "I think he'd be amazed that so many people understood what he was trying to accomplish. But mostly, I think he'd be proud that you found the courage to share it instead of keeping it buried." Claire nodded, feeling a peace that had eluded her for years. The farm would continue, worked by people who understood its history and respected its future. The technology that had cost so much to preserve would keep growing and evolving, helping communities around the world become more self-sufficient and sustainable. But perhaps most importantly, the lesson at the heart of everything, that knowledge belonged to humanity, not to those with the power to suppress it, had taken root in a new generation of engineers and innovators who would carry it forward. As Claire prepared to leave the workshop for the last time as its unofficial guardian, she touched the brass nameplate on the locomotive. Virginia Mountain Railway number 23 still gleamed as if newly polished, but now it represented more than just a piece of restored history. It represented the power of persistence, the importance of community, and the truth that some secrets were meant to be shared. Outside, the autumn wind carried the scent of harvested fields and wood smoke from chimneys throughout the valley. The land that had kept Brennan's secrets for over a century was finally free to breathe, to grow, to nurture the dreams of people who understood that true prosperity came not from controlling resources, but from using them wisely. Claire drove away from the farm as full darkness settled over the Shenandoah Valley, but the lights in her rearview mirror burned bright and steady, powered by technology that honored both innovation and tradition. The story that had begun with hidden plans and whispered threats had become a legacy of openness and shared knowledge that would outlast any attempt to suppress it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.